right, so I wanted to create one final video here to try to help those of you still struggling with the structure of an argument essay. Because after I looked at the essay 1.4 results, wow, a lot of you are just writing the most incoherent essays imaginable. And so that has just convinced me that this structure is so needed, because if you guys are having trouble stringing together, you know, some basic thoughts on something like the proposal of a creativity class, then we really need this structure to help tie all of our ideas together. So one more time, here's how it goes. And it all starts with the argument map. Now, clearly on an essay assignment like a timed essay, you don't have time to write a full argument map. So we need to treat this argument map more as just a visual illustration of the reasoning in your essay. All right, so this is that structure you've hopefully seen several times before. I've posted multiple examples of different arguments structured in this way. And let's take a look at a sample response to creativity class. Now, I haven't actually filled this in with specific ideas because I don't want to write your essay for you. But I have filled it in with the bare bones of what every essay must be about. And so we'll start down here at the bottom. Yeah, these two boxes here, your primary claim and your primary premise. Those together make up your thesis statement. Okay, your thesis. Whoops, skipped away there. There we go. So, your thesis for this prompt must be some variation of this, because this is really the only way to actually answer the prompt. Creativity class should or should not be required by Frisco ISD because creativity class is A. Okay, whatever the primary reason is why it should or should not be offered. That is your thesis statement. All right. Now, because we have a claim supported by an evidence statement, that must mean that there is an underlying assumption connecting them together. The shared term is going to be creativity class and creativity class. So your assumption is going to be something like A, whatever that reason was from your premise, is something that should or should not be required by FISD. Okay? Now, your first body paragraph is going to take that assumption as its claim, all right? And this is the argument it's going to make. It's going to support that claim with evidence, just like you always would. So A should or should not be required by FISD because A equals B. Now, of course, there's an underlying assumption there that B is something that should or should not be required by FISD. That, however, doesn't need to go on our essay because that's not a point we're arguing. That's just an unspoken assumption. All right. You need to move on after stating your premise with an example of how A equals B and another example of how A equals B. Okay. So this whole first paragraph should not be about creativity class at all. It should be a general, an argument about a general principle of the kinds of things Frisco ISD should or should not be required. Okay, or should not require students to do before graduating, that sort of thing. So this whole argument is kind of a philosophical argument about what ought to be required for graduation in schools. Okay, moving on from there, we have our supporting arguments. Okay, so this premise, creativity class equals A, that is going to act as the claim for both our second and our third body paragraphs, our two different supporting arguments. So we'll start with the blue here, the second. Creativity class equals A because creativity class equals C. Okay, so it's just some way, some specific way in which creativity class equals A. So creativity class is C. And then we need an example of creativity class being C. Another example of creativity class being C. All right. Then for our third body paragraph, we start with the same claim. Creativity class equals A because it equals D. Okay, and then we give an example of how creativity class equals D and how creativity class equals D as well. All right, that is the structure you guys need to use. In an outline, here's what it would look like. Okay, the outline is what you turned in for Essay 1.4, and they were by and large disastrous. So let's make sure we get this straight. The thesis, once again, creativity class should or should not be required by FISD because creativity class would A. Okay, so there's my single premise. All right. Now, the claim in my first body paragraph is going to be the assumption that connects these two statements together, the evidence to the claim. So A is something that should or should not be required by FISD because A is B. Okay, and then I give an example of how A is B and another example of how A is B. All right. My second body paragraph, my claim is going to be the exact same as the primary premise again. Okay, creativity class should not be required by FISD because creativity class would A. Okay, so that's going to be my claim here for my second body paragraph. Creativity class would A because it would C. And then I give an example of how creativity class would inevitably C in another example. Okay. For my third body paragraph, same thing again because it's offering two different lines of reasoning in support of that premise. Creativity class would A because it would D. Okay, and an example of how it would D, another example of how it would D. Okay. For a more detailed illustration of this, I highly recommend you check out my previous video where I take you through my entire approach to the Drabel conformity prompt, where I do a complete argument map, a complete outline, and then the skeleton of an essay. I don't write the full essay, but I write all the essential parts to see how the reasoning works. So I hope this helps clear some things up because this is a structure we're going to be using all year on all 3 AP Lang essays.